from the group, if that makes the most sense, and it, I think, frees you from having to do anything technologically besides talk.
Beautiful.
Do you have a way? Do you want to be able to text one of us if you want to, or you'll just pop up if you have something to?
I can pop up. I don't know what you can see right now, but if I type, there's a chat box that only we can see. So if you see that visibly, I can say, let's see, where?
Yeah, totally.
So I can also say, I can say, 15 minutes till the end, do you want to switch to Q&A? And then you can cue me to pop back in.
Okay.
And I can type you I can also type you questions, Doug, to ask. So I don't have to be, if you're paying attention to that, I don't have to be like,
surprise guest! Surprise guest! Oh my God. Okay, I'm going to get my
I can, if it's easy,
Do you anticipate?
Yep.
Do you anticipate there's actually going to be a live audience for this?
We have 85 people registered.
Well,
shocking. That's
and
amazing.
We started advertising yesterday. So,
well, people are bored silly.
So we'll see. I will say, that there's a lot of some of the board from the workshop, some of the staff from the workshop, some other folks. We did a little early outreach to some of the donor community, but 85 people, considering we put the word out yesterday, is not bad. I don't know. Declan do you know what the registration gone up further?
Yeah, we're at as of a second ago, we're at 174.
Oh my God.
I haven't met you, Declan. I'm Lisa. Hi.
Lisa, I'm Declan. Hi, Rachel.
Hello.
Hi. Nice to meet you.
Lisa, Declan is the executive fellow at the workshop, and they do many wonderful things, including figuring out all the technology behind what we are in the midst of doing.
Love it.
Now, I have questions for you ladies, but anytime you want to go off on a tangent, please feel free.
Fantastic.
I'm your Jack Parr. I'm your Johnny Carson. Who do the young people watch? Your Jimmy Kimmel.
Will you be my Seth Meyers?
I'll be your Seth Meyers. He's probably the best.
Yeah, that's what I.
Are you at your tiny desk, Doug?
I'm at my tiny desk in my pretend apartment, which is not my home.
You guys, does our apartment look palatial?
It's huge.
It looks
and
beautiful.
Sumptuously designed, I have to say. I should have thought more about my background. I look like I'm in a dorm room.
I think that adds to the charm.
Yeah, exactly.
We were spending a lot of time yesterday thinking about watching Stephen Colbert and realizing that he decided not to, expose his wealth anymore, and therefore had decided to shoot into some anonymous corner of his giant palace instead of out back where he had done that one, or his bathroom, which was nice, because there's this whole backlash against celebrities and their backgrounds, here I am in my
what's that
clawfoot tub with rose petals.
The graffiti you saw, eat
the rich. Hashtag eat the rich.
Wow.
It's back, by the way, which isn't new. Eat the rich.
You ladies might be subjecting yourself to that kind of treatment, but with that palatial apartment behind.
Hashtag Washington Heights.
Rachel's advertising some of her artwork, actually. Rachel's paintings are behind us. Yeah.
Secret insider information.
Are we not supposed to be giving secret? What is the point? Are we supposed to be talking about theater? What are we supposed to be talking about?
I think whatever you.
I have a list of questions. Many of them are specific to your careers, which fortunately I know rather well.
Okay.
And also some of them very specific to your respective histories with the workshop, things like that. Okay. And a lot about, the current moment we're in and what it means.
Yeah.
Yeah, so.
So we'll be doing this a lot.
Yeah, we'll be looking really forlorn for long.
Coordinate it right there.
We're making it look like we're touching our faces without touching our faces.
I am touching my face.
I'm touching mine. I haven't been out for 10 days. I think I can do it.
You really haven't. I know you haven't.
Do we want to broadcast, Declan?
I am ready when everyone else is ready.
Great. So I guess, Taylor, you're going to mute.
Bye. I'll be listening.
I will also be listening and silent and invisible.
And Erin, you're going to introduce it all, right?
Yes. And also, just to say, did I say this before you got on the call or after? I can't remember. So for the audience, they're not going to see Taylor and Declan in my boxes. They're just going to see the 2 boxes.
You told me that.
And then I'll pop back in.
Great.
So I'll hit broadcast whenever whenever you all are ready.
Let's get Rachel back. I like that light. You didn't like that light in the background? It's going to get dark.
It's okay.
All right.
You think?
Okay.
We'll find out.
All right, let us see what happens now. Let's see,
Yay.
participants are climbing rapidly.
Broadcasting.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. Let us give it a minute as we are climbing in attendees. Lots of people waiting to get into the call.
Oh, great.
Oh, yeah, let's see. Hello, everyone who's joining. We're just going to give it another couple minutes to see how many people we can get on the call, and then we will begin. Thank you so much for being here. All right. Let us see. It looks like we're stabilizing out for the moment in terms of numbers. Maybe more folks will join us. My name is Aaron. I'm the literary director and dramaturg at New York Theater Workshop. And on behalf of the whole workshop family, we are so happy to have you all joining us for this first of what will be a series of virtual fireside chats where we are all here strewn across the globe. We are so fortunate today to have Doug Wright, an illustrious member of New York Theater Workshop's Board of Trustees, Pulitzer Prize-winning playwright, screenwriter, here to be interviewing Lisa Peterson and Rachel Hauck. A little bit about Lisa and Rachel. Lisa is a 2-time Obie Award-winning writer and director. For the workshop, she, with Dennis O'Hare, created an Iliad. She also directed Bexley, Ohio, Trestle at Public Creek, Slavs, Traps, The Waves, and our first production of Light Shining in Buckinghamshire, along with working elsewhere all around the country. And Rachel has also worked with us a fair amount as well. Hurricane Diane, Hadestown, What the Constitution Means to Me, and an Iliad, scenic design for all of them, and has also worked all over the country. I, without further ado, will turn it over to Doug at this point, and I'll see y'all in a little bit. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, Aaron.
Thank you so much, Aaron. And full disclosure, Lisa and Rachel and I are very close. Lisa and I attended undergraduate college together and have known each other for just that long. And I've known Rachel for quite a while as well. So if we burst into giggles, you'll have to forgive us because the formal nature of an interview just makes me smile. But let me start by asking the obvious question. How are you ladies faring during this madness?
Well, let's see, this is Wednesday. It's only been, I guess it's been 2.5 weeks since Broadway went dark on the 13th of February. And that I sort of marked that day as the day when we all understood how serious this was. At that time, Rachel was in California with her mom and I was by myself. And so a week ago, Rachel bravely jumped on a couple of airplanes to get back here. So I'm super grateful that we are in fact in the same space right now, because if we did this a week ago, we would have been in separate boxes, Rachel in California and me here. So I don't know. I mean, it's like up and down.
I think, yeah, it's an impossible experience. I mean, you're, heartbroken and terrified. And also really lucky and really, really fortunate. So, I mean, yeah, it's tense. It's tense, but we are fine. All that is to say, we are fine.
Right. Yeah.
Which is actually wonderful news, and we can't underestimate the power of that. But let me ask you, it's a tough question, but let me ask you, are there projects that have been permanently impacted by the current crisis?
Sure. Do you want to start? It's a long list.
Well, as it turned out, I was just at the beginning of a kind of a 6-week period where I had just opened a play in Berkeley, and I was here to kind of work on some writing projects and be with Rachel and see my friends and see a lot of theater. So in a way, at first I wasn't feeling the hurt as much. I had a show in Berkeley, which had opened, and a week later it closed. I have a show that's supposed to start rehearsals in 2 weeks, and that won't happen. I have a show in the fall that has been yanked out of a schedule in a major regional theater, and I don't know that it's going to go back in. It was yanked to make room for things that from this season that need to move in, and we were not given any promises that it would come back. So yeah, I mean, so for me, about last week, there were definitely, there were quite a few days when I absolutely had no work to look forward to even next year. Because also for me as a freelance director, I was in the middle of that moment where theaters have just announced their seasons or about to announce their seasons, which means that I was about to find out what I might be doing next year. And so now, I mean, you know, there are a couple of things that hopefully will happen in the fall now because they've moved from the spring, but that's what happened. That's what happened to me. I have a few playwright friends that we were supposed to be doing their plays, and they're just devastated. Mm-hmm. If I were a playwright right now and my play had been yanked, or I think I would be, I know that I would be I would be quite inconsolable probably. But luckily that didn't happen to me as a writer, just as a director.
For me, the production of 72 Miles to Go, Hilary Bettis's quite beautiful play, opened on March 10th. So it had 2 performances before it was closed. How I Learned to Drive on Broadway is about to go into tech. So the set is sitting there longing for some attention, waiting. Hopefully that will be able to go into tech in time to open those doors right as soon as it's possible, but we'll see. Confederates, Dominique Morisseau's brilliant new play, is hopefully will reopen the doors at Signature, we hope. But that's, you know, it's all a long ways off. We're just going to have to see. There's actually quite a few projects that just everything is up in the air, and, you know, a couple things that are on tour that are on hold, you know. So we'll just see, I think.
Well, let me ask then a happier question. We are here at the behest of our beloved New York Theater Workshop, and I'm sure we have a lot of usual suspects listening, and we have a lot of board members and members from our rather specific, deeply connected and devoted community. So I know when I first came to New York, the Workshop was the first theater that reached out to me and gave me a kind of aesthetic home that has been indispensable over the years. Could each of you take me through your first interactions with the Workshop and how you became part of its community?
I'll start because mine
yours is first.
Is older, yeah. Well, let's see. Probably around the same year that Jim began as artistic director. So in the what year did Jim start? In the 80s. We're talking 87, maybe?
Sounds right, yeah.
The new directors project was still the foundation of the programming at New York Theater Workshop, and I interviewed to be chosen maybe in 86 or 87 and wasn't. And then Jim came up at the invitation of Robert Moss. I had done this adaptation of The Waves, Virginia Woolf's novel, with my friend David Bucknam, and it's a musical, and we had done it at the Hangar up in Ithaca, New York, and it was run at the time by Robert Moss, who had founded Playwrights Horizons and is an amazing mentor. He invited Jim Nicola up to see it. Jim did, and he decided to produce it as part of the new, I'm not saying the right name, Aaron will correct us, the new directors project. Oh, 1988, Aaron is saying was, okay, all right. So we did The Waves in 88, 89, it was the new directors project, right? So as part of the new directors project, we were on, when New York Theater Workshop was on Perry Street. And that was the play that made it possible for me to stop my day job, which was casting. And I worked in the casting department at Lincoln Center, actually, when Greg Mosier was there. So I was able to stop casting, though I loved casting. And Taylor and I can have a long conversation about this at some other time, but I found casting I was at a moment where I thought I either have to go full, I have to devote to myself to this completely or not. And I really wanted to direct and write. So anyway, that was my break in New York. That was I think it was in '88. And from there on, New York Theater Workshop became the go-to place for me to bring an idea. And then I would also always sort of hope that they might bring me an idea. So that's been true. I did one more play in the Perry Street Theater, which was The Light Shining, which was only a couple years after that, or even 1 year or 2 years later, I did Light Shining in the Perry Street Theater. And then I definitely have considered it my New York home theater since then. So yeah.
Terrific. And Rachel?
The first time I was there was actually when so I came up in California, and we were, Lisa and I started dating there out at when she was working at the Mark Tipper Forum. We did a couple shows together, which led to some romance, but I
like dating. I can love that. Dating. We were just working together. Well, and more.
So yeah. You came out to direct Trestle at Pope Lick Creek, and that was the first time I was ever in the workshop, was because you were working there. Mm-hmm. And I was blown away by it as a Californian. It was a really incredible introduction to New York, that theater scene. And to be in the room with actors of that caliber and those phenomenal designers. It was Zelinsky and Ricardo, mm-hmm. and it was an incredible, beautiful production. Mm-hmm. Naomi was around.
Yeah, it was Naomi Wallace play.
And so that was the first, I met Jim, I met Linda, I got to meet, that was sort of my introduction to the New York theater scene, was hanging around as the girlfriend on that show. And it was kind of a great way to meet everybody. And I wanted to work for the workshop forever. I mean, from then on, I have just been sort of part of that family, but on the girlfriend ticket. And then finally got a chance when we did your quite brilliant production of an Iliad.
That was the first show you did.
The first show I did at the workshop. So
it's fantastic. Yeah. I want to go back to an Iliad in a moment, but first, and I think I know you both well enough to be accurate in this, but correct me if I'm wrong. There is in our profession the myth of graduate school and its absolute necessity, and the fact that if you go to NYU or Columbia or Yale or Juilliard and work past an undergraduate degree and get a graduate degree, that is entree into the professional world. And if memory serves, that's actually not true of either of you. Am I right?
That's correct.
Talk to me a little bit about that and how you broke that graduate school barrier, because so many people see it as essential, and yet so many of the great theater artists I know working today actually did not go that route.
Well, I did try to get into the Yale drama. I went to Yale undergrad with Doug. I tried to get into the Yale Drama School after about a year or so of being out, and I didn't get in, and I was heartbroken. And then a year later, I was working enough in little ways that I thought I wasn't going to put myself through trying to get in again. But so it's not that I didn't try, but I think I found other graduate schools in a way. I mean, for me, honestly, casting, working in the casting business, which was my day job, was also my graduate school in a way, because I was watching incredible directors. I was watching Robert Woodruff and Jerry Zaks, very different, Jerry Zaks. I even observed Jerome Robbins, because I was working at Lincoln Center. I ended up working at Lincoln Center as a casting director. So my day job was, I was in the room with these incredible directors. I was watching them work with actors in auditions. And I was meeting a lot of actors that way. So I was kind of developing a community. I do think that I do think that grad school can provide you with a community and also a methodology, which I never had. And I still to this day, especially when I'm asked to think about teaching or to try to teach, I don't have that system in place to be able to it's very hard for me to start to try to break down what I do in a way and to be able to talk about it and share it. And I think that's because I didn't go to grad school. But New York was my grad school. New York City was my grad school. And just going to as much theater as I could. I did assist a bit, but not very much. I was really, I think, super lucky to start working as an intern in the summers up in Ithaca at the hangar where Robert Moss was running it. He gave me a break and gave me jobs, and I learned on the job. So he would give me a play, he would let me do Tartuffe. And then he would say, as an artistic director, he would give me notes that were my grad school. That was my grad school. And some of them would be really simple things like, you know, do you see the power of the downstage move? Like that, some of it was very, very technical and some of it was basic storytelling. And so I was able to learn on the job and then be grateful that I didn't have student loans. I think things have changed now and people can go to grad school and not end up with tons of student loans. But because I didn't have student loans, I could stay in the theater and scrabble a little career together. And I didn't have a very high overhead. So I could live down on Mott Street and get paid not very much to do these tiny shows at Ensemble Studio Theater. I ended up at Ensemble Studio Theater. That's how I got into casting. There was like a book when I got out of college about internships in New York City, and there were no directing internships at all. And I decided that a casting internship was the closest thing I could get. So I applied for the casting internship at EST, and I got it. And that's how I met Billy Hopkins and Risa Brayman. And I ended up in the casting business because they were taking off. They were starting to do movies, and then they got the job at Lincoln Center, and they weren't sure they should do it. And I said, oh, do it. I'll do the work, and you guys can keep doing the movies. And that's how it went for me. So anyway, that was that. And then I just, I never applied again. And I do ultimately think you learn to direct by directing. And so that's how it worked for me, but that's very rare. I understand. I think grad school is great for lots of people to get a handle on how to do it.
I remember coming to visit you at Lincoln Center when you were working there and just being so impressed and thrilled that I actually knew someone in that building and I got to sit at your desk and we'd have conversations and it was so thrilling to me. Rachel, how about you? Because you even as an undergraduate student studied a radically different subject, am I right?
No, I studied theater, set design at UCLA. I got a liberal arts degree. My parents were very, they were very clear that they wanted me to have a liberal arts education. And I am so grateful for that. I would have gone straight to a conservatory and they counseled me against that. And I took that advice and I'm very grateful for it. And I wound up right out of school in a television internship with the Television Academy, and I worked in TV for 3 years, which was fascinating, but not my medium. And so I took a step back from that and found my way. I mean, I wanted to go to grad school. Again, my parents were very, they cautioned me against going into a career in the arts without too much debt. And I am grateful to not have that weight to lift. But I also really didn't want to hear Ming tell me I needed more art school. And I was certain he was going to tell me I needed more art school. So I actually didn't apply. And I wound up working in 2 different companies in LA, out of which my sort of aesthetic is formed. One is the Actors Gang, for which there's no rules. And one is the Taper New Works Festival, where I learned how to behave in a proper theater. And that's where we met. but those two things together is where my aesthetic comes from. But, you know, I have massive holes in my education. I don't have art history. I don't have furniture history. I don't have architecture history. I don't have color theory. Nobody taught me how to draft. So like the whole thing, I'm just waiting to get found out every single time. I am gonna get caught. This is the show where where my lack of a graduate training is going to catch up with me.
I'm going to move us a little bit because the sun is coming in so strong through that window.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, is that okay?
Of course.
All right.
Let me ask you, I know, Lisa, you have done a great deal of work with the Sundance Theater Lab, and Rachel.
Representing.
And for years, Rachel, you were very involved at the National Playwrights Conference at the O'Neill. And I'd love to hear from each of you, as a director, Lisa, and obviously a designer, Rachel, what is the difference in approaching, say, a developmental experience like the Sundance O'Neill experiences, as opposed to going into production? How do your goals differ?
Oh, sure. Do you want to speak to that? You want me to?
Why don't you start? Because you had an interesting specific role.
I mean, I had a phenomenal 10-year run at the O'Neill in the Playwrights in the Summer Lab with Wendy Goldberg. I started with Wendy and was there for her first 10 years. I think she's now in her 16th or 17th year by now, which is bananas.
No way.
But you know, there's a philosophy there that is deep and true, which is when you're working with a play there, you know, the playwrights are at their most vulnerable. The plays are not done when they start, and they're also not done when they leave that section of time at the O'Neill. So that the way that you speak about plays and the way that you think about plays is with the playwright as they are figuring out what that play wants to become. And so you can reflect, as a designer, you can reflect back to them what you see in the material that is there as a way of helping their conversation basically with their own play. You know, I always talk about it like, you know, designers, you know, you go into rehearsal as a playwright, and let me explain this to you, Mr. Wright. And you're looking at the, you know, it's the night before that first rehearsal, and you are looking at the play, you know, you're obsessed with a thing that isn't working, or a character you can't get to land, or a moment that's not quite what you want it to be. And you're looking at it in almost in a microcosmic way. And designers look at plays globally. So, and we also look at it from a particular perspective. So it's almost like you're looking at a play from here. And when you talk to the designers about it, it's like you take the play away and turn it sideways and kind of to the back, and they reflect the play back to you from a whole different perspective. And it comes from the way designers approach the written material, and which is to say, you know, we're looking at the whole and looking at it from how that world is going to become dimensional in a way. And so it's a thrilling thing to do. That job where we worked on 8 plays in 4 weeks, and we had to, you know, know them inside out well enough to have that conversation in great specificity with the playwright, not with the director, where it's okay if you remember most of the characters' names, but with the playwright, where you really have to know everything and know it well. And so it was a pretty, it was thrilling, and it was a remarkable way to work. But I learned how to do it from being around the writers in LA. There was an incredible period at the Mark Taper Forum when Gordon was there, where 5 different, I mean, you should speak to this, but 5 different artists, Lisa was one, got these incredible grants to
Mellon grants
to form writing community in LA, where there were so many brilliant, and still are brilliant writers in LA working independently. And Gordon offered them a home, and you and Diane Rodriguez and Lisa Alfaro and Che Yu and John Beluso and L. Kenneth Richardson all brought together different communities. And I, again, on the girlfriend ticket, got to hang around and listen to playwrights speak to each other about their forming work. And there's nothing more generous than playwrights reading other playwrights' plays.
Not just generous, intelligent, like
super smart.
Yeah.
So I just listened for years and years. I just got to be in the room listening to those incredible writers. just a remarkable community of writers. But that's my way into new plays.
I started going to Sundance in, I think, 1988. Around the time that I started at New York Theater Workshop, I got invited because I knew an actor who went a lot to Sundance and had been to Sundance a lot, probably about now close to 12 times over the years, like maybe every 2 or 3 years. There'd be periods of time when I'd go, and Sundance has changed over the, over that time they've had a number of different artistic directors. This was well before it was Philip Himberg, but I've been often when it was Philip as well. And that, and also Ensemble Studio Theater. I landed in the new play world in New York and sort of learned what that meant to work on a new play. And I think even now, because I do also direct a lot of, I've been lucky to not get, I have fought not to be pigeonholed into one kind of work. And so I have also done a fair amount of classic work, Shaw and Shakespeare and Lillian Hellman, and as often as I can, I try to do that too. And I do think that working on so back to your question, working on a new play in development at Sundance or in any situation where the focus is for the writer to be able to exercise and encounter other artists who can reflect back to them and not give them, not tell them things, but just be present as the play is being made. That's a very Zen role for a director. And I have to go into working at Sundance on a new play or at the O'Neill or anywhere with this. I have to tell myself, and I tell the playwright, I'm gonna think of this as exercise. And it's, I want to be honest in my reflection. I want to, I'm going to interrogate. I'm going to ask questions. That primarily, I'm like the audience seat for a writer working on a new play. And what I'm going to keep asking things of it, but I have no claim whatsoever. I don't expect that this is anything that I will ever work on again. We're going to have this really intense, more than a one-night stand, but like a 10-day stand, and then bye-bye, and we'll see. But that that role is much more like a doctor, I think, like a diagnostic, and yeah. Now, if I'm gonna if it's now I'm gonna do a production of this play and it's a new play, then that's different. Then I'm gonna rise to a slightly different responsive level, and I'm gonna start to pitch things like, I think it should be, what if there is no sofa? But I wouldn't say that if I was working on it at Sunday. But even so, working on a brand new play is very different from working on a classic. Because if I'm working on a classic, then I am asking myself, what do I find interesting? What do I need to say with this? And then I'm basically writing by directing. And I think that's a very, very different activity from working on a new play, and very different from working on a new play in a developmental moment where it's really still in process. So it's a long answer, but that's what I've done all my life. So it's very interesting to think about different modes of directing.
No, absolutely.
Should we scoot over this? Lights
You wanna
kind of
keep moving?
Yeah.
We're panning. You got
Sun
it.
keeps getting you.
Welcome. Welcome.
The other corner of our living room. This is hilarious.
Now,
Now you can see this.
you're seeing everything. The piece that you collaborated on that is most familiar, I would imagine, to workshop audiences is an Iliad. What is it like as a couple to actually collaborate on work? And do you leave it in the rehearsal hall? Does it pillow talk at night? How does it work when you actually collaborate together?
It's constant. I mean, there was, I think when we
met working together. So that's the building block of our I mean, honestly, that's how we met.
Yeah.
Is working together. So that's kind of natural.
When we became a couple, we were like, oh, okay, we should figure out the rules. We should figure out, like, this is when you talk about work and this is when, and no, that doesn't work at all for us. So it's just when the ideas are there, they're there. And it's very, I mean, I don't have any idea how many plays we've done together. A lot.
A lot. Maybe
And
30?
I think it's actually more,
Oh.
but it's it's great. I mean, it's extraordinary. Lisa's an incredibly visual director, and it is one of my very favorite collaborations when we make things. Is great. So to make something that she was also co-writing was an extraordinary experience because, well, I mean, that was a very particular production of that play because there were 2 different productions for 2 different actors simultaneously. So that was, like part of my job, 50% of my job in any given play that we do together is to design the scenery and get it on stage. And the other half of the job is to take care of the director. And
That doesn't seem fair.
No, it's great. It's great. I mean, because I'm going to spot faster than any assistant when you need lunch. You know what I mean? Like, that's just, it's nice to have somebody in the room who can do that. I don't know. That was a very generous experience. The making of an Iliad. I mean, you should speak to it. It's an incredible piece of writing. It's a remarkable performance. Lisa's work is phenomenal, and it was an incredible team. So it really is one of the highlights, both in terms of the content of the material itself and the thing that we made. It's one of the great joys of my career. I'm incredibly proud of it and feel lucky. We still do it occasionally in super amazing places and bring the play around the world. And every time we do it, it blows me away. Nice work.
I also, because you mentioned it, I want to ask you, both of you, the play has gone to some extraordinary places around the world, and you've traveled with it, and Dennis has done it all over the globe. If you could just tell me a couple incidents where there was a locale where the play was especially resonant, or a cultural experience with the play that was in some way unexpected. You've just been to so many remarkable sites.
Yes. Yeah.
For me, the once in a lifetime was Cairo. In
25th, what year was that?
It
Cairo?
was
17?
It was just
right after the Arab Spring.
Yeah, and it was just
I mean,
was this
a few months
very
after.
very rarefied moment politically.
Maybe it was a year later.
And to bring a piece about war to that corner of the world, and what we brought as Americans and what they saw as Egyptians. It was a phenomenal experience. We also brought a level of, we tell stories differently in terms of the stagecraft than they do. And so we don't travel, the way that show travels is it doesn't travel with a set. We make basically an installment wherever we go, and
An installation
and figure out what we can use on stage to come alive through the storyteller, but the storyteller is everything. And so it's an extraordinary, we travel with 4 suitcases and a musician, live musician, and watching those guys, and everything else is then the lighting and sound design, because as the poet tells this story and his mood changes, the whole world changes around him, which is all lighting and sound. So, and you want things that can come alive and become the war as you are, the stories, the elements that he's talking about, but it's so human. And watching those technicians never use the equipment that was in their building the way that we use their equipment. I've never seen a crew of guys who I really, really loved. They watched the entire tech process, they watched the dress rehearsal, and then they watched both performances. We only did 2. And they stood and watched the whole thing 4 times. Mm. And they'd never seen anything like it.
There were a lot of, in Cairo, it was DCAF, the Downtown Cairo Arts Festival. And it's an incredible arts festival, actually. And pretty avant-garde. We were in a small kind of basement theater. When we got there, I remember that there was sand everywhere. Why was there sand everywhere? Down in the basement and everywhere. And it felt very, well, we didn't know whether to be frightened or not. I mean, that happened from the time we got to the airport. We have a prop suitcase that the poet uses, and there are all these photographs of art from different wars, and they went through everything, and they were really like wondering, why are these photographs here? So we were ready to be scared, and it was just it's always so amazing to then relax and realize we're all human beings. These are artists. These are young artists working here with us. These are Egypt, and they're being very generous. We don't speak Egyptian, but they're taking us around through the impossible traffic in downtown Cairo to take us to like the best falafel. And, it was the first time we ever used subtitles, and we weren't sure, because it's very talky, whether it would ever work to tour an Iliad and perform it in English, but with super titles, isn't there too much reading? The super titles were down below, the beautiful Arabic super titles. I'll never forget that first. I just would weep, like watching the language go by. And I had a great collaborator in the translator and operator of the super titles.
There's not a big pre-purchase. People don't buy their tickets in advance, and so we didn't know actually if anybody was going to come. And we had bought, I think there were more tickets for the first performance sold for the first performance than the second, but there's a huge word of mouth culture. So the first performance, much to our delight and amazement, was packed. And then people started to tweet about it, and it went basically viral overnight. And the next day there was an enormous line, and they couldn't get everybody in. And to hear that room respond, despite everything else, to hear that room respond to the humanity of that story and the heartbreak of that story, I will never forget it.
What year was that? It was in the spring.
I would have to look it up.
I mean, also downtown Cairo, I don't know what it looks like right now, but this was either the spring of 2015 or 2017. I'm going to guess, and I'm embarrassed that I can't remember exactly. But there were concrete barriers still up, and lots of them were tall. It was 2015, Erin just said. Yes.
Thank you, Erin.
Wow.
And they were spray painted with this incredible graffiti, and there was still barbed wire, and there were pockmarks all over the buildings in Tahrir Square. And so it was still, if it was the spring of 2015, it was still a very, things hadn't been locked down yet. Again, they did get locked down, but they weren't yet. And so anyway, that was incredible. We were in Shanghai last summer, and in Shanghai, we couldn't, people were were they fast to figure things out. I mean, technically, we had just speed, and then the audiences were so young in Shanghai. Lots of young women. And we were told that Chinese culture that Homer was not part of their culture. So we were ready to have absolutely no response. And it wasn't true. I mean, they had studied. So anyway, we have lots and lots of tour stories. We could talk about that. That for me, touring an Iliad around the world is the thing that I am the most in love with right now. I mean, it's an incredible, so the production at New York Theater Workshop is the production that we tour, but in a very kind of stripped down way. And hopefully we'll do it as long as Dennis can bear to do it.
And for those of you who don't know, who regrettably didn't see the show, it was also broadcast on PBS, but it's a really stunning adaptation of the Homer, condensed and articulated in a new way. Lisa and Dennis did the text together, and it's performed by a single actor, and it's really a powerhouse.
Dennis O'Hare, yeah.
Dennis O'Hare. And let me ask, what's on the bucket list in terms of plays from the canon, or maybe unproduced plays that you know about, that either of you are chomping at the bit to do and haven't been given the opportunity yet?
I want to do a great rough and ready downtown dirty production of Threepenny Opera.
And we almost did it. And Rachel passed that desire to me. And we were so close to doing it with Taylor Mack and Meow Meow at Berkeley Rep. And then Taylor's life got busy, so it hasn't happened yet. But
I would love to do that. I would
Yes.
love to do a good meaty production of Sweeney Todd. I would love to, I'm just like, oh, let me at him.
the Brechtian stuff.
Yeah.
I haven't done Shaw in a while. I love working on George Bernard Shaw's stuff. I had this crazy idea to sort of adapt Back to Methuselah. This is like an idea I've been carting around for decades. Back to Methuselah is an rarely produced 9-part, 2-day Shaw play that basically starts in the Garden of Eden and ends in some crazy year in the future, 3081 or something like that. And it's hairy and messy and bilious and does not make any sense. And for a minute, when I was lucky enough to get to do the Philanderer with its original ending up at the Shaw Festival a couple of years ago in Canada. And for a minute, I thought, then they changed artistic directors, so I don't know if I'll ever be back, but I was trying to get them to let me do that. And I think I'd still like to try to do that, and I'd love to do some more Shaw. I have really been, especially in the last couple of weeks, Doug, in this lockdown time, the writer part of my brain has been coming forward a little more than the director part, I think, because I can't direct if I can't be in the room. And for me, directing is all about being in the room in the moment. That's the great pleasure for me. I don't like pre-production. I don't like planning things out. That's not my favorite part of things. I do like looking at, I like talking. I like talking with designers. I like casting. I love looking at a model and going, ooh, what if we, so it's not that, but I don't like sitting and by myself and figuring out how will this scene work? I don't even do it because I don't like it. I love being in the room. I love it. It's like life for me. So I can't even think about not being able to be in a rehearsal room again. That's pretty upsetting to me. So the writer part of me has hooked in. So from the moment that it was, the theaters got closed, I started to set up daily meetings with my writing collaborators or things that I'm making from a writing point of view more than a directing point of view. And so, Dennis and I are writing a new play, which might actually have a 2-prong, maybe 2 plays, I don't know. And I'm making something with Todd Almond, and I'm making one of the things that was supposed to go in rehearsal this 2 weeks from now was Jill Sobule and Liza Birkenmeyer have written this really fun sort of concert play called Fuck 7th Grade, which I had hooked Rachel into, which is rare these days because she's super busy and I can't usually get her. But we were going to do it at City Theater in down in Pittsburgh. But Liza and Jill and I have another idea. So we're working on that next idea. Things that could happen won't be ready for 2 or 3 years,
But even as a writer,
writing with this.
Well, I was just going to say, even as a writer, there's this certain sense that we can keep doing what we do because there's suddenly all of this solitude. And for the first few days of this experience, I was getting that damn on Facebook and on Twitter that, Shakespeare wrote King Lear during a plague. And I just wanted to strangle the people who were, it's like as if we're not under enough stress. Who needs the pressure? But there are deadlines I have to meet, and there are certain drafts that people are still expecting. Thank God, it normalizes my life to some degree. But in the face of this, everything I'm working on, and I like to flatter myself and think I'm working on some ambitious, large-minded projects, but everything feels puny right now. And every time I sit down to work on something, whatever issues it raises for me seem luxurious in the face of this historical moment. And so just getting the necessary focus to work has been extraordinarily difficult, don't you find?
Completely. Which is why I don't try to do it alone. I mean, I can't, if I had to be just me and the idea, I don't know what I'd do. Luckily, I only write in collaboration with somebody else so far. So I can just gab and we can, and a couple of those projects are not, are kind of, I suppose, delightful. And so they're taking my mind off of it in a happy way. Yeah. And then the one with Dennis is very much almost too timely. That's harder to do. It's harder to work on. The thing that is about Roman history and about the Roman Republic and how it ended. And so that's
a little
harder.
terrifying.
Yeah, too terrifying.
At the moment. Well, I want to, if it's okay, I want to invite Erin back because Erin has some questions from our very attentive audience. So Erin, do you mind joining us and sharing some of the questions?
Here I am. And folks, if you're listening in and have a question, feel free to use the question and answer feature, and we will do our best to get to as many of them as we can in the next 15 minutes. The first questions we have, I feel like, well, now that I'm looking at them, this one you just asked, Doug. Let's see, this is a question from our friend Shelley. If you could go back in time and have a do-over of any production you've done, would you, and what would that be?
Oh my God.
Or if you'd rather, a different one from Shelley, what are your favorite personality traits that you look for or embrace in a collaborator?
Both hard questions.
Way to go, Shelley Miles.
Shelley. I mean, I think it's fair to, it's okay to, Ellen wouldn't be surprised to know that. So when we met working on a play called Mules by Winsome Pinnock as a workshop. She's a great British playwright. And then we worked on a new play by a friend, Alice Twan. So when we got together, we'd done a couple of plays together.
Yeah.
And one of the plays that we did early when we were new in our relationship was by Ellen McLaughlin, this gorgeous play called Tongue of a Bird, which we did at the Taper with Cherry Jones and Diane Venora and Marion Seldes. And we brought it to the public. It was a co-production.
Yeah.
And so you and I, we struggled, I think, to figure out the way that play should live.
Yeah.
In space, in time. The play is about, in brief, is about a female search and rescue pilot whose mother hung herself, and who has been hired to look for a lost little 12-year-old girl who's in the snowy mountains up somewhere in New Hampshire or up in the Pacific, up in the Northeast in the winter. It's a very intense, very poetic, gorgeous play about loss and terror and bravery, and a lot of it takes place in the air. Both the mother hanging, because Ellen had played the angel in Angels in America. And I think she would even say that I mean, Ellen is a great playwright as well as a great actor. And hanging in the air all those years, waiting for her cue, this play came to her mind. So it was like the fever dream of the angel in a way. So much of it was in the air. And when I look back at that now, I think both of myself and of the scenic choices we made, we were too literal. We couldn't get out of the literal. And so therefore it didn't live the way it should have. And we kept going at it, working at it. So
I still love, we did a production, before we did that, we did a production of it at the Intimon, which was purely poetic. That was my first, that whole thing about not having a graduate school training, right? And that was my first full on major LORT regional production. And the first thing I said to those guys is, what I don't know is what I don't know. So I'm going to learn it with you guys. And that led to a couple of, I think, in a really beautiful design, far more poetic than the design that we actually used when it moved to the Taper in the public. And I think the poetry of that design really spoke to me more successful than the later ones. But I would love another crack at that play. That's an exquisite play.
Yeah.
We have a couple of questions that feel related to me about this moment that we're in and what comes next. A question from Mark and a question from Hadestown. How do you feel people will react when the theaters reopen? Do we feel like people will rush in? Do we feel like people will be afraid of being in large groups? when there's a middle ground between before we're back to normal, can we envision a way for performances to begin again? I think that's a great question for all three of you.
Mm-hmm.
Great series of questions.
It's an enormous question. I mean, I think we all are probably thinking about it all the time right now. I think one of the things that this moment proves more than anything is the needs for gathering, the need for people to be together, the need for community. I think that is one of the, that need to have an emotional journey together in the same space is major for people. It's a human need. And I think it's the reason that theater will never disappear. I think in this moment, how long it's going to take for people to want to, this is a very unique moment, right? So how long it's going to take for people to want to be in the same room together as opposed to that, it's tricky.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's almost too early to say, because I feel like the rules are being established day by day about how we interact, and it's going to get, I don't know. They just closed the playgrounds. People need playgrounds, but we don't know how long this is supposed to last. So I feel like there's going to be the rules set by our governors or, and our mayor and all that. And, our federal government, maybe or not, but I don't know. I think there's going to be this push and pull between people wanting to get back together. Like our favorite restaurant closed across the street, and they were open for takeout. And then 2 days ago that we realized that they signed out. They were like, sorry guys, we're out. And so Instagram, there was just this outpouring neighborly, like, well, we're going to have a huge block party as soon as we can, as soon as we're released. So I think there'll be this great push to be back together again in theaters and in restaurants. And at the same time, I think there will be terror. And I don't know how those are going to balance out, but there might be this intermediate thing. Honestly, I feel like what we're doing now, like the virtual forums, the virtual, the Zoom play readings, even the pieces of theater that I can imagine happening in this way, where this is how you watch, this is how you listen, this is how you watch a play. There are 126 people in the audience, and we could be acting as opposed to talking. And I think that there will be virtual theater like this before there will be crowded theater again. I don't know what the intermediate live thing is, where it's like, oh, okay, we can tape out some seats, we'll put people in every other row. I don't know. I don't know how the social distancing, but in the same room, is it going to have to be all or nothing? Like we're going to have the all clear, the white flag is waved, we're okay, we made it through, or you'll have to wear a mask, but then you can sit next to somebody. So I wish I knew, but I actually think there's going to be a period of time where we are working virtually.
And I think you're right, Lisa. I think it depends on the flow of information and the way that we will respond as a community if we know there's a vaccine and we've had it, if we know there is immunity, if there has been the large-scale testing that everyone feels like should have already happened, and we've all been tested and we know our status and how to behave responsibly. I think until we learn more about A, the nature of the disease, and B, the way government authorities are coping with it, it's going to be impossible as individuals to make responsible decisions about our own safety. And until we know those rules, it's impossible to know, right?
So distant, like my brain goes to these crazy things, like you were just saying, once we have a vaccine, or once we know that so-and-so is immune because they've had it already or whatever. So how are we going to know that? So then is there going to be like a stamp that you have that says I'm immune, or I've already had it, and then you're allowed in the theater, but you're not, or I don't know. It's very scary to contemplate. I like to believe, oh yeah, we're going to be open in a couple months. Yes, I believe that's going to happen in the fall, but it's very scary.
I think new forms are going to come out of this time though, because I think the urgency for artists to create is real. And I think the need for people to speak out in this moment is real. And so I think new form will be born out of it. And I don't know when we get on the other side of it,
You know what I
happens
started wondering
next?
about today was protest. How is public protest going to adapt itself to this? Because that's one thing we cannot do right now. We can't go in the street. We can't stand next to each other and march and yell. And I don't know, I mean, there's social media, but it's not the same at all. So, I don't know.
A couple of other somewhat related questions regarding our moment, and then there's some questions that are not regarding this particular moment, but more about you three in particular and your experiences. Similar questions from Sam, and an anonymous writer, about being aware of the impact on the front of house folks, the folks who are showing up every day, but a curiosity about how theaters and patrons of theaters can continue to support you all as artists in this time. And then to me, what feels like a similar question about what are you doing to feed your creative souls right now? How can we be helping you? And then also, how are you all finding ways to help yourselves?
I'll just do a very pragmatic plug. The Actors Fund, if anyone out there is looking for a serious way to assist artists in the theater who are in peril right now because of their jobs or because they are ill, give to the Actors Fund. And if you want to support a playwright who's struggling at the moment, and there are many, the Dramatists Guild Foundation, which offers emergency grants to playwrights all across the country. In the last 3 days, we've given hundreds of these. And that's the DramatistGuildFoundation.com, dgf.org, dgf.org, dgf.org. I'll say it again because I got it wrong the first time, dgf.org. But to help writers out there, that's something everyone can do.
And I also, I mean, I know that a lot of people in our field are trying to sort of, come together and figure out ways of supporting each other. One of those, I will put a plug in for the Trickle Up project that Kristen Marting has started at Here Arts. And I think that those programs will start to grow and be important. I do worry about people who were already kind of living on the edge and were doing work in New York City, already not getting paid very much money and just getting by. So I think people who, I'm hoping that everyone who loves theater, both who does it and people who do it and love it and people who don't do it and love it, will find the ways to participate in its life by giving to these organizations that are going to keep artists from disappearing. Yeah.
There's I'm going to add one more called the Artist Tree, which is an extraordinary organization that is allowing no questions asked grants to artists to help them get through these times. I mean, there is no two ways about it, off Broadway, off Broadway. Those these forums, the artists doing this work are living hand to mouth. It's an extraordinarily financial fine line. They do this work because it's urgent. This work is a huge part of the New York City economy. It is also a hotbed of arts and artistic discussion nationwide. And in this moment, it is incredibly perilous for a lot of people. It's something like 96 off Broadway productions that were halted somewhere in their performance and rehearsal schedule. That's an extraordinary amount of work. And every single one of those has not only the director, the writer, the designers, the actors, but as to the original question, the front of house staff, the crew, the carpenters, the administrative staffs, it's an extraordinary, the artists, the artisans, the carpenters, the electricians. It's an extraordinary chunk of talent that is very specific to this field. And so, us finding a way to sustain each other and finding our way through this is truly urgent in this moment. So whether it's the Writers Fund, whether it's Trickle Up, which is an extraordinary thing, the Artistry, these are ways to help us find our way through until we can literally get back on our feet.
And the second part of the question about keeping sort of creative energy alive, I mean, every day, I think we're sort of trying to figure that out. like I said, what I literally did is, because I like schedules. That's how I think. I like a calendar. I like a schedule. I like a rehearsal. I like to know I'm going to be there from noon to 5. So, and I like to think about that. So pretty much right away, I made dates with some collaborators. So I like have an 11 o'clock, a 1 o'clock, and a 2 o'clock every day. I will say that I am, I do like a tiny bit of yoga every morning, which I never did before. And I make sure that I go for at least a 30-minute walk every day. And that's about it. Like somehow that eats up the day. So things like reading books, which I thought, oh, if I need to read books, not doing. We keep saying, why are we watching more movies? In a way, the multiple choices of television and streaming services and films and all that, that's kind of mind-boggling to me right now. I don't know why I can't. It's hard to make a choice about that. But for my daily schedule, that's kind of, I'm hanging on to it.
For me, less so, right? I'm away from my studio. I'm away from my tools. I'm away from my people, my extraordinary people that I work with in my studio. My immediate reaction to this was the activist who you just heard coming through your speaker, went to work and trying to find ways to support the people who are, who I know, I am so fortunate to be 1 year away from walking that thin line financially. And so my immediate reaction was to go to work and find anything I could do in that direction. And now that is sort of like, those balls are rolling and I'm a little more at sea. I'm a little bit more, like I watch Lisa do her 3 meetings every day and then I go for the walk, like, and I have to find a way. I think I have to find a way to put myself back to work in this moment. I think I feel an enormous amount of shock. I think, the upending of my really regular 12-hour-a-day job, which just, quite literally 7 projects just evaporated or were put on hold. So I went from being really functioning in a very high, multi-tiered, multi-directional way to stopping, which is quite shocking. It's quite shocking. So, I don't know. I'm sure I will find a way forward. I would be most excited if anybody has any more activism that needs one more body. That's where my heart is. I promise all the rest of y'all I'll go back to work for the 2 things that are still hanging on. So, yeah.
Great. Well, there are a few more questions, but we found ourselves at the end of the hour. So we want to be respectful of your time and respectful of everybody watching in. Thank you to the 3 of you for kicking this off with such generosity and grace. We are so lucky to have you. Thank you to everybody who listened in and is still listening in. We are going to be back for the foreseeable future for Monday afternoons at 3 o'clock. We're going to have master classes with artists from our community. Upcoming, we have Rachel Chapkin, we have Jeremy O'Harris, we have Celia Keenan-Bolger. We have a class on collaboration with director Liliana Blaine Cruz and designer Adam Rigg. And we'll be back Wednesday evenings for these conversations as well. Next week, we have the queen of underground performance, Penny Arcade, in conversation with Jim Nicola, our artistic director. The following week, I'll be in conversation with Celine Song, who wrote Endlings, which is one of the productions that was cut short at the workshop just a few weeks ago. All of this programming is free and available to the public. We were able to compensate all of the artists whose work we had to cut short, including the front of house staff and the crews. And we are able to offer a modest compensation for folks who are joining us here. So if you are in the position to make a contribution to support the work, we'd greatly appreciate it. As you leave the meeting, there will be a link to a post-show survey or a post-talk survey. Please take a minute to fill it out. We'd love to hear what you thought of this and try to do better and do more. And otherwise, so we appreciate you taking a moment to take that out. And we look forward to seeing you back on Monday. We look forward to seeing you back next Wednesday. Again, Doug, Rachel, Lisa, thank you so much for your time. And thank you all for being here. We look forward to being in community with you virtually and being back in rooms together soon.
Thank
you so much.
Bye.
Just say the workshop is home to all of us. And so it really is, it's very, very dear to all of us. If there's any way you can help support the workshop and help them find their way through this time, please do that.
Well said.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all. We'll see you soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.